very much.
Thank you very much. And now Asma has agreed to answer some of your questions. So if you have questions, please.
Sorry. My name is Howard and I'm the student from University of St. One of my questions first was who should we blame now for the suffering of Pakistani people? The religion or poverty or the international influence? The second one is, what's your solution? What do you want us to do? Thank you.
Well, I think that poverty has some part to play in it. But the empowerment of religious militants was a wrong political direction. And I believe that we have to blame political leadership of that time for it. What are my solutions? Number one, my solution is that we cannot get away from it. We have to be able to address it. And therefore, by addressing it, we have seen that the best way to address it is to empower the liberal forces of that, the genuine liberal forces of that society. And they do not happen to be military dictators. Happens to be civil society, which can only be represented through political parties. I know that we have a poor leadership, there's no doubt about it. But we still have even a poorer leadership amongst the military. And they are not answerable, accountable to people. But I am talking about a system, to put a system in place, and that system is the only start. Whether you do it today, or you do it 20 years later, after more bloodshed, it will have to be a start. And secondly, to help Pakistan and to goad the leadership into better governance than simply come and saying, whack you, get rid of these funders. That's not the only way to do it. We have to have better accountability, because look at the money that was poured into Pakistan. No accountability at all. And I think it has to be better accountability. And when the funders give the money, it is equally their responsibility to ask for that accountability. Otherwise, they are creating a kind of a corrupt society there at the cusp, which holds progress at that level.
Thank you very much. Now the gentleman.
Hello, my name is Michał Żechowski. I'm a journalist and I also work a bit for human rights. I don't think so that poverty is an issue, because if you put it in YouTube, you put in, I work for Tibetan, for example. If you put just words Tibetan, Chinese shooting Tibetan, you can see that the Tibetan soldiers, Chinese soldiers are shooting Tibetan. It's just very interesting, because Tibetans are escaping from China, from a rich country with good economy, to Nepal, one of the poorest countries. So that's one thing they don't have in China. They don't have a freedom and a hope, I would say. I read some texts, and there was some part of interview about the Bombay terrorist attack, and they catch one of the terrorists from Pakistan, and they interview him. And actually, he seems not to be any kind of like fundamentalist fanatic, but there was a young person without a hope, so he just couldn't influence his own village, what's going on, and so I understand it's like a natural need for freedom in people, which turns in the end as a fundamentalist. One question, could we distinguish, because some people living in the West, they are saying that, oh, it's Islam, you cannot talk about it, it's a religion, you have to respect it fully as it is. People like to be beaten and women like to be harassed, so it's a part of the culture. Can we try to distinguish, of course you can talk about any religion and culture, it's a lie, but can we try to distinguish between Islam and Islam as an ideology? This is one question. The second question, isn't it a mistake to mention, to say a Western world or Western values, because India is a democratic country and Japan is a democratic country, so couldn't we just say about general universal values, democracy and freedom, and this language would be maybe more proper, because otherwise a lot of people will say, oh, this is something Western, we're different. And the last question, it's very simple to say, oh, we have a military regime, that's the main problem. But a lot of people are worried of the Iran or Afghanistan scenario when the fundamentalists came to power. So it's like a balance between, you have a regime, which is, I'm not justifying it, but there is a threat that the fundamentalists will come to the power. And what will be the best way to go to the normal democratic freedom model, remembering about this trends? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very important questions. But even in Afghanistan, when they had the first Lower Jirga, it was not the fundamentalists that came to power. And I believe that if the system works properly, the Afghan people and political parties are allowed to operate there. But do you know that the UN and the Americans have never allowed political parties to operate there? They want to rule their country through NGOs and tin pot dictators of their own. But if they really allowed people to vote, you saw that in the last election, women were elected. Women were elected governors. That is surely not a fundamentalist vote. So I think that in many of the Muslim countries, voting is not allowed because people know that if vote is allowed, the dictators will be out, and at some point the fundamentalists will be out too. Look at Bangladesh. The two parties that come into power are not fundamentalist party. In fact, Hasina Wajid's party, the Awami League, is not at all a fundamentalist party, it's a secular party. That's also a Muslim country. And I gave you the example of my own country, where I can assure you that when you have electoral politics, they're nowhere to be seen. And that is why they pick up the arms. Because they know, if they knew they could win through the electoral process, they would not be doing it. Your second question was the Western model and the Eastern model. Well, in our own region, we have India as democracy. We have Bangladesh now as democracy. It may have been in a transition, but it is still there. We have Sri Lanka, which is democracy. We have now Nepal in a transition, rocky transition, but yet they've got rid of the king. And we have Maldives, which is also in a transition, and democracy. So it's not just Western models that we are looking at. And the places where you don't have democracy is where religion is more significant. And that is why I come to your first question. That is not a question of Islam, it's a question of Muslim countries with dictatorships. And when you say that, is Islam a problem? Well, every religion has its usefulness, every religion has its strong points, but every religion also has its weak points. And look at, for example, the Hindu religion. It calls for sati, that a wife should be burnt at the pyre of a husband. But have India allowed it? No. So there are many such traditions which are associated either rightly or wrongly with religions. But I think that we must recognize that a woman who is a Muslim has as much aspiration as a woman who is in Poland or a woman who is in Sweden. I have as much right and I have as much self-respect as anyone else. And I am not saying that myself, and incidentally I have not studied in the West, I have studied in the East always. But I also talk about my hundreds of clients who come from very disempowered situations. And we have a history. I mean, we fought colonialism. I think one doesn't realize that. We've sacrificed. We know what rights is. We know what freedom is. We fought for it. Our forefathers have fought for it. So I think it is naive and arrogant on the part of the West to think that they are the only ones who know the taste of freedom. I think we have as much value for freedom as anyone else in the world.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Agnieszka Graf, Center for American Studies at the University.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. I have two questions. One has to do with